Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
At 3:30 p.m. on Monday, December 26, 2005, the body of Laquita Mae Gunther was found in an alleyway along North Beach Street in Daytona Beach, about a block west of the Halifax River. Investigators told the Daytona Beach News-Journal that her body likely had been lying there for 48 hours before it was found, meaning that she was killed on Christmas Eve. Laquita's partially clothed body was found by a customer at the car parts store in the vicinity. He discovered that the shop was closed and headed back to his parked car. That's when he saw the body lying in a fetal position between the car parts building and a wastewater pumping station. Laquita was 45 years old. The discovery of the body didn't exactly invite a news frenzy. Daytona Beach, a city with a population of about 60,000 people at the time, averaged about 15 murders a year. It was tragic, but not unheard of, that something like this would happen. Weeks later, Laquita's name would start appearing in news stories again. Around 9 a.m. on Saturday, January 14, 2006, 19 days after Laquita's body was discovered, a second woman was found dead in Daytona. The body of 34-year-old Julie Green was found near LPGA Boulevard by a construction worker, about 2 miles north of where Laquita was found. Julie was shot execution style, as was Laquita. Both were found face down and nude. Both were sex workers. The story gained steam, with reporters asking their police sources whether a serial killer was on the loose. The lead homicide detective at the time told the Daytona Beach News-Journal that he was looking into whether Laquita and Julie had cheated someone in a drug deal. He emphasized that he couldn't confirm yet whether they were killed by the same person, but he was looking into it. It took some time before police released details of Julie's murder, but information started to seep out, suggesting that both women were killed with a .40 caliber handgun. The same detective who was interviewed by the News-Journal kept trying to downplay the possibility of a serial killer in Daytona. But those questions weren't going to stop, especially not after a third victim was discovered. The following month, on February 24, 2006, the body of 25-year-old Iwana Patton was discovered, alongside a wooded area near the corner of Mason Avenue and Williamson Boulevard, about 4 miles west of where Julie's body was recovered. Iwana's body was found by a couple around 1:30 in the afternoon. They ran to the nearest gas station and called the police from a payphone. 3 murder victims in 3 months. Bike Week and Spring Break, annual events that attract thousands of visitors to Daytona, were just weeks away. So police had a lot to contend with, including a media eager to publish stories on a daily basis, focusing on the main question on everyone's mind. Was there a serial killer on the loose? This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 197. Laquita Gunther was a divorced mother of 5. A photo of Laquita was hung on the wall at a bar she was known to frequent on the east side of town. She was well known and well liked in that social circle. She also reportedly often grappled with substance abuse. The last time she was seen alive, on Christmas Eve, she was in a crowded bar. She left with a man she had met and never returned. She was murdered about 300 feet from the bar she was last seen in. Julie Green, who was 11 years younger than Laquita, was known by her friends as Sissy. Laquita and Julie probably knew each other. They hung around some of the same people, and the local homeless shelter had records for both of them. Julie also had a drug addiction. Julie's biological father died when she was a toddler. Her mother remarried and the family moved from Jacksonville to Daytona Beach. Her mother died when she was 8 years old, and her stepfather adopted her. The two reportedly had a strained relationship, and he watched helplessly as Julie started hanging with the wrong crowds and abusing drugs. She ran away from home at the age of 12, moved out of state, and returned to the Daytona area at age 15. On the night she was murdered, Julie was walking to a payphone to call her stepfather. She had planned on visiting him in neighboring Port Orange that weekend. Investigators said it was on her way to the payphone that she likely was picked up by someone and killed. Just like Laquita, Julie was shot in the back of the head with a .40 caliber handgun. Iwana Patton had a nursing background. According to those who knew her, she turned to sex work because she was destitute and needed money. Iwana would be the last victim, at least for a while. Articles kept getting written about the case for the remainder of 2006, through the one-year anniversary of Laquita's murder. The unsolved case of the 3 murdered women generated media attention beyond Florida, too. One national news magazine did an in-depth piece on it. In that story, the still unidentified killer was dubbed the Streetwalker Stalker. A ballistics test confirmed that all 3 women were, in fact, killed with the same gun. DNA was recovered from 2 of the victims, Laquita and Iwana. The DNA came from the same person, but there was no one in any DNA database who matched, at least not yet. Despite all of this, the police still would not commit, at least not publicly, to the serial killer narrative. But sources would tell the media that investigators were looking for someone who killed all 3 women in the same manner, that all of the victims had accepted rides from their killer. They were killed after apparently agreeing to have sex in exchange for money. They all were found fully or partially naked. A task force was formed to catch the killer. It was made up of local and state authorities. One of the state investigators who was assigned to it was Jack Bisland, who at the time was with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, also known as FDLE.
It was February of 2006, and I was contacted by Captain Brian Skipper of the Daytona Beach Police Department, who was the commander of the Detective Bureau. I was asked to attend a meeting and asked for investigative assistance and resources with the investigation of, at the time, 3 homicides that they were actively involved in. And FDLE had many resources that we could collaborate with and bring to the investigation. So we agreed to do so in partnership with Daytona Beach Police Department, the State Attorney's Office, Homicide Unit, and the Volusia Sheriff's Office.
This case bothered investigators for a few reasons. The killer wasn't sophisticated or careful. He had left his DNA behind on 2 of the victims. He used the same gun in all 3 killings, and he appeared to have had all of them in his car. One persistent theory going around was that the killer may have been a law enforcement officer. That theory was taken seriously enough by detectives that local police officers were told to give DNA samples. There was no match to any of them. Anyone who was arrested on suspicion of soliciting a sex worker was asked to provide a DNA sample to police. Some of them did. All of them were eliminated. The net wasn't just used for those charged with sex work-related crimes. In Florida, everyone convicted of a felony is required by law to provide a DNA sample. The same rules don't apply to those convicted on misdemeanor charges. But with this case squarely on the minds of detectives, They made sure to ask everyone they brought to the jail to provide a voluntary sample. That included everyone who was arrested, regardless of whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony. That practice was rather controversial. The DNA requests were referred to by some as DNA dragnets. They thought the practice gave police too much leeway and was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. Others thought doing this made the world safer. Authorities weren't relying only on DNA evidence. They took a long, hard look at the ballistics evidence, too, and devoted much of their investigation to finding the gun that was used in the killings. They were able to identify the manufacturer, caliber, and model of the gun, a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber model VE semi-automatic. Tens of thousands of those handguns were distributed across the United States beginning in 2003. Local licensed firearm distributors and gun shops were contacted, and records were subpoenaed. Authorities sought records from all gun shops within a 50-mile radius of Daytona Beach. A list of people who purchased that type of gun locally and regionally were interviewed. At first, no significant leads were generated from those interviews. But there was one lead that investigators thought could lead to something fruitful. In the spring of 2006, a tire molding was recovered from the scene where Julie Green's body had been found. That molding was linked to a car located in a junkyard in DeLand, a city about 20 miles southwest of Daytona Beach.
A tip came in, a lead on a person of interest that we identified as working at the junkyard. In an effort to try to obtain that person's DNA sample covertly, we established a surveillance to watch this person in hopes that he would discard something that might contain his DNA. Example would be a cigarette butt, a cup he may drink from, or a can. We established a surveillance at that location somewhat surreptitiously under the guise of conducting another surveillance, all in hopes of watching this individual discard something so we could seize it and send it to the lab and compare it against the homicide's evidence. A couple of days into the surveillance, we were unsuccessful in doing that. The person of interest was determined to have a felony conviction on their record. And during the interaction with the undercover agents on surveillance, he confided in them and showed them a .45 caliber firearm that he had, and bragged to them about having other firearms. So that produced evidence of yet another separate and independent crime, which is carrying a concealed firearm by a felon. So we obtained a warrant for that individual's arrest, and we sought out to arrest him at the junkyard that day. And while we were there, we received consent to search the premises from the owner. So we searched the premises while we were there, with the opportunity to do so. And that's what resulted in the seizure of the tire that was identified back to the Julie Green thing.
None of the weapons seized on the property included a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, however. And the DNA from the man arrested on firearm charges didn't match the DNA left at the murder scenes. The tire mold appeared to be a red herring for investigators. That would happen a lot. Hundreds of people were watched and or interviewed in the case, and none of those leads led them any closer to a suspect. Then came another homicide on January 2nd, 2008. The victim in that case, 30-year-old Stacy Gage, was shot in the head. Her body was found about 2.5 miles from her home near an abandoned church. Detectives concluded that she was actually killed on December 11th, 2007. Stacy wasn't known to be a sex worker, but she had an ongoing drug problem. Her body was found after a police officer pulled off near the church to catch up on some paperwork. When he rolled down the window, he detected the odor of decomposition. Stacy's murder led to another media spree. Even the national media made a return visit to Daytona. The chief of the Daytona Beach Police Department at the time, Mike Chitwood, told Newsweek, quote, It's eerily similar and has all the earmarks of the other cases. I hope to God he's not back, but I'm afraid that's what we're looking at. To this day, investigators remain divided on whether Stacey Gage was a victim of the same killer as Laquita Gunther, Julie Green, and Iwana Patton. The case remains open, and Daytona police will reportedly not talk about it further. The task force that was formed in early 2006 to catch the Daytona serial killer, or DSK as it was now known, began to lose steam in 2009, the year after Stacey's body was discovered. It was completely dissolved later that year, and the investigation went cold. One volunteer cold case investigator called it one of the most baffling cases he had ever seen. He couldn't understand how someone so brazen, so careless about leaving evidence behind, could not be caught. How could someone like that not be in the FBI's DNA database? It made him think that maybe the man was a murderer before felons in Florida were made to submit their DNA after a conviction. But if so, how was it that he never committed another violent crime? Did he all of a sudden become a law-abiding citizen? It also made him think that maybe the killer was dead, never to be identified again. That was starting to look more and more probable. But then, a decade later, the killer struck again. It was March 7th, 2016, and the body of 32-year-old Rachel Bay was discovered along Beeline Highway outside Jupiter, Florida. That portion of the highway is located near a wildlife management area. It was a desolate place back then. During the next couple of years, police would find more bodies in the vicinity. Detectives reasonably thought that Rachel's murder had some connection to those cases. The last person to speak to Rachel was her roommate, Jose Gonzalez, who spoke to her briefly on her cell phone the night of March 6, 2016, the night before her body was found.
Now, did you indicate that you actually spoke with her over the telephone somewhere around 10 p.m. after she left?
Yeah, she said she was with somebody. She couldn't talk. That she called me when she was on her way back to the house.
Did she give you any kind of an indication of where she was located when you spoke with her?
No.
Rachel reportedly abused drugs and turned to sex work to fund her addiction. Her brother told the local media that he had tried to convince her to leave Florida and rejoin her family in North Carolina. But he said she was persistent about staying and trying to figure out how to better her life. Rachel was strangled, and detectives said she fought her attacker. She had bruises on her body, consistent with someone who fought back. According to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the killer's DNA was recovered from the crime scene. Daytona Beach Detective Sergeant David Dinardi was one of the first investigators in Volusia County who learned that Rachel's murder had a connection to the Daytona killings a decade earlier.
In December of 2016, we were both notified. The Daytona Beach Police Department and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department were notified that the unknown DNA profile from our case matched their case. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement made the connection and then in turn notified both agencies. So beginning in December of 2016, early 2017, the Daytona Beach Police Department began working with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, doing a joint investigation, sharing notes and information, trying to solve, we were looking for the same offender. But still, 2017, early into 2018, we really hadn't made any progress. We knew we were looking for the same person, but we had no idea who he was. So in May of 2018, we made the decision. There was a big case out of California, the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo. I believe he was arrested April of 2018. And around that, within a week or so, they announced how they did it using genetic genealogy. So we made that decision between the Daytona Beach Police Department and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office to try it in our cases, because we knew we had this, we have a complete DNA profile from our first victim. So we thought genetic genealogy would be a way that we could gain, hopefully potentially identify our suspect.
It was soon learned that the killer's DNA did have characteristics similar to that of someone who had submitted DNA to GEDmatch, a genealogy company. Now, unlike most genealogy companies, such as Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and others, GEDmatch allows access of its customer DNA database to law enforcement. An independent company, Peloton, which was created to assist law enforcement in solving cold cases, uploaded DNA evidence from various crime scenes across the country to GEDmatch in an attempt to close as many cold cases as possible. That's what led to the arrest of the Golden State Killer, and authorities in Florida hoped for the same fate for DSK. And that's exactly what happened. Genealogy specialists in Florida were able to link the killer's DNA to a woman in Florida. The metric that they referred to is called a centimorgan. Basically, the higher the centimorgan, the closer the relative. Authorities said the woman had a relatively low centimorgan score, but they knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was related to the killer. Debbie Abney, a crime intelligence analyst supervisor with FDLE's genetic genealogy program, gave detailed testimony later at trial about how the DNA strain was linked to the killer. Specialists were able to discern how far down the family tree the killer was to the woman they had found.
She was roughly around 100 centimorgans, so she would have been a second to third cousin range.
Investigators from FDLE interviewed that cousin and were led to another female relative. They interviewed her, and she granted the investigators access to her GEDmatch results, which revealed her centimorgan score. It was 1,700. Abney said based on that score, it was likely that the second woman investigators interviewed was a half-sister of Rachel's killer. It was determined that the woman had 3 half-brothers.
Once you develop the 3 names and provide them to law enforcement, that basically, I don't want to say ends your participation, but that's like, it turns it over to law enforcement agents, and then they move on from there to kind of gather the other information they need.
That's correct. Genetic genealogy is an investigative lead, so we provide that to the investigator, and then they continue the investigation.
It was now up to investigators to find their suspect. Among those 3 names given to them, the name Robert Hayes was the one that jumped out. Investigators discovered that he was a student at Bethune-Cookman University at the time the 3 Daytona victims were slain. Bethune-Cookman is located in the heart of Daytona Beach. And not only that, but Robert Hayes was a name that had come up to investigators early on in their investigation. Robert Hayes was first interviewed by police in April 2006. As you'll remember, at the time, Daytona police detectives were required to interview everyone in the area who had purchased the type of gun that was used in the killings, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson Model VE. Among those 100 or so local purchasers of that model of gun was Robert Hayes. He had made his last payment on the firearm and took it home on December 2nd, 2005. He also purchased ammunition that day, according to court testimony. 20 days later, Laquita Gunther was killed. The then 24-year-old Hayes lived in an apartment near campus on Jefferson Street, in proximity to where all 3 bodies were found. A Daytona Beach police officer interviewed him at his home. The report from that interview misspelled his name. It identified him as Robert Haynes, indicating that he was not a high-priority interview subject. The interview took place in April 2006, 2 months after Iwana Patton was killed. It seemed to only last a few minutes. Hayes was asked whether he still owned the gun that he had purchased. According to the report, he said he had given the weapon to his mother. Hayes then provided police with the phone number of his mother, who lived 5 counties away in South Florida. The interviewing officer followed protocol and turned the number over to the task force. But records show that no one on the task force followed up on it. According to court testimony, Hayes reported his handgun stolen in December 2006. 8 months later, he filed a police report in Riviera Beach in Palm Beach County. The officer who took the report later said he was suspicious of Hayes' story from the start. Hayes told him that he had left the gun on the floorboard of his car, which he had parked in a high-crime area. The officer wondered why someone who knows the area would leave a gun lying around in plain sight in an unlocked car. Nonetheless, he took the report and filed it. Prosecutor Andy Urbanek would later tell a jury that was Hayes' attempt to distance himself from the murder weapon.
He lied about the gun because he knew what the police were investigating. He knew why they were there. He knew why they were looking for this gun. And he knew if he gave up that gun, that was it. He was caught. They'd have the murder weapon in their possession. That's why he lied to law enforcement.
After more than 13 years and 4 murders, the plans were in motion to collect the DNA of the actual killer. They located him, surveilled him, and tried to obtain a sample from him. A surveillance team from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office watched Robert Hayes at a bus stop in the 5500 block of Broadway in West Palm Beach, close to where he lived. They watched him enter and exit a corner store. He had what appeared to be a canned beverage wrapped in a brown paper bag. Major Ron Matino of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office testified at Hayes' trial.
He came out of the store, went to the bus stop. You could tell he was waiting specifically at the bus stop, kept checking up and down the roadway for the bus to arrive. Observed him open the can and take a few sips out of it.
Did you observe him do anything else, like chew gum, light a cigarette?
A cigarette, yes. He had he was wearing a backpack, like a single strap backpack, and he retrieved a cigarette out of the carton from the backpack and smoked one.
Before he boarded the bus, Hayes discarded the cigarette and paper bag, throwing both objects on the ground. After the bus pulled away and Hayes was out of the detective's line of sight, one undercover detective picked up the cigarette and another fetched the brown paper bag, which contained a half-empty can of Steel Reserve, a brand of malt liquor. Authorities got their DNA sample. And they were about to get even more evidence. After detectives in both Palm Beach and Volusia counties identified their suspect, it was time to bring him in for an interview. Another one. That interview was led by James Evans, an investigator with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. The second interviewer was Bill Frazier, Deputy Chief Investigator with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office. A video of that interview was later shown to a jury. Afterwards, Robert Hayes was charged with the murders of Laquita Gunther, Julie Green, and Awana Patton. His trial began in February 2022. From the start of the interview, Hayes was fidgety and nervous. When he was read his Miranda rights, he started to get emotional. Dressed in a black tank top and blue gym shorts, he slouched in his chair. He spoke softly. Hayes told investigators he had lived in Daytona Beach while a student at Bethune-Cookman. When he enrolled, he did so on a band scholarship. He lived in Daytona from 2000 until 2006. His major? Criminal justice. After finishing school, he moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, then Atlanta, Georgia, then back to Palm Beach County, where he was originally from. Throughout the interview, Hayes denied knowing or meeting Rachel Bay.
You never had any communication, encounter, or any type of interaction with her in your life? Not to my knowledge. When you say not to your knowledge, that's a somewhat ambiguous statement. What exactly do you mean when you say not to my knowledge? I don't know. You don't know? No, sir.
He was pointedly asked whether he had sex with her. He answered with a resounding no. Detective Evans showed him photos of Rachel and explained to him that she was found dead along Beeline Highway. Hayes didn't waver. Detectives Evans and Frazier steered the conversation to him meeting women through Backpage, the classified advertisement website that included ads from sex workers. He admitted to meeting women on there. Hayes said that whenever he met sex workers, he would bring condoms with him, and they would wind up at a hotel having sex. Detective Evans again brought up Rachel Bay.
We have irrefutable scientific evidence that establishes that you know her. Not only did you know her, you had sex with her.
The conversation continued about Backpage and what types of women he preferred to meet for sex. At one point, Hayes blurted out, "I didn't do nothing to nobody." The detectives didn't get a confession from Hayes, but they wouldn't need one. They had his DNA, and by then had linked it to 3 of the 4 victims in Daytona Beach and Jupiter. The odds that anyone other than Hayes committed those crimes was 1 in 700 billion. The entire world's population is less than 8 billion. Investigators also had cell phone data that placed Hayes in proximity to where Rachel's body was found. That evidence was also introduced at trial. The jury listened to a long line of witnesses, many of whom had to testify through video conferencing. Many of them had long ago retired from law enforcement. The officer who discovered Iwana's body, for example, testified from his home in Washington state. Prosecutor Urbanek summed up the killings, including the one in Palm Beach County, as crimes of opportunity. He said Hayes knew who would make the perfect victims, the kinds of women willing to go to secluded places with him.
These are 4 victims who were all engaging in prostitution to some extent. And the reason that is important is not so much the fact that they were or were not engaging in prostitution, it's that they were easy targets. I mean, these are women who are engaging in this activity. They are willing in this activity to be alone with men in secluded locations. They can be picked up easily in areas off of the street or off of the internet. And they almost have to be trusting of the person they're going with. They're not engaging in these acts with the defendant or with a John in a highly populated area. They're willing to go out to a field. They're willing to go in an alleyway. They're willing to go a Beeline Highway.
Prosecutor Urbanek described in blunt terms what Robert Hayes did to his victims.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is clear. It's supported by science. It's supported by fact. And the evidence shows beyond a reasonable doubt that in December of 2005, it was Mr. Hayes standing in that alleyway behind Laquetta Gunther, pulling the trigger of a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber VE moments after he'd ejaculated into her mouth. It shows that it was Mr. Hayes who pressed the muzzle of the same .40 caliber Smith & Wesson VE into the back of Julie Green's head, leaving a burn mark from the firearm out in the middle of a field in a construction zone in the dark. And it shows beyond a reasonable doubt that it was Mr. Hayes who finally sent a bullet through the front of Miss Patton's nasal cavity, passing through her head in a dark field, again in Daytona Beach.
The defense told the jury that the state hadn't proved their case and that they lacked evidence. The attorney for Robert Hayes, Francis Shea, said there was no proof that Hayes had shot Laquetta Gunther, for example. He said the state's only evidence was that he had purchased a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun and box of ammunition that could be fired in any .40 caliber pistol or handgun. He said her body was severely decomposed and that there was no time of death that had ever been established. The jury, which was composed of 8 women and 4 men, deliberated for more than 9 hours. As the day transitioned into night, the judge asked whether they wanted to spend the night in a hotel in case they weren't able to finish. They sent a note to the judge stating that there was no need to make any reservations. They planned to finish that night. The jury found Robert Hayes guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Hayes, who had been demonstrative throughout the trial, regularly conversing with his attorneys, stood stoically and stared straight ahead while the guilty verdicts were read. Among the investigators who were actively involved in the case during the last few years was Detective Sergeant David Dinardi, who began his career with the Daytona Beach Police Department in early 2006, shortly after Julie Green's murder. The day after the verdict, Dinardi said he was thinking about those detectives who worked the case during the early stages. He credited them with finding some big puzzle pieces at the start of the case. Without their contributions, the entire puzzle wouldn't have been put together so many years later.
So it's just great. Like I said, it's great to be in this position now, to be able to be there when he was arrested in 2019, and then to be in court this week when he was convicted. So I mean, it's the best feeling in the world. But then, like I said, I'm proud of all the work in the past 17 years that not just this agency did, but the state attorney's office, the sheriff's office, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. So long story short, it's the best feeling in the world.
The long wait for a guilty verdict may have been over, but the trial wasn't. The jury was sent home that Tuesday, but were told they had to return the following Monday to begin the penalty phase. They still had to decide whether the man they convicted should be put to death or sentenced to life in prison. When the trial resumed the following week, the jury listened to testimony from the victims' relatives. Among the victim impact statements were those from the relatives of Iwana Patton. Iwana's niece, Anisha Ferris, read a total of 4 written statements. One of them came from her uncle, who was Iwana's older brother.
I will never understand why this happened to my loved one. My sister was a fun lady to be around. She was the life of the party when she shows up. She worked hard and was educated and wanted more out of life. As we all know, that life was taken from her without a reason or a cause. My sister was a warm person and did not have to die in the manner that she did on that lonely night. My family needs closure.
As she read that statement, she paused 4 times and looked directly at Robert Hayes. When she read her own written statement, she called her aunt the glue to our family. She also called Iwana her first role model when she was a child. The jury also heard from Laquita Gunther's daughter, Guyette Lester.
I felt a duty to my mother to be here today in person to testify before this court that my mother meant something to many people and she was loved. I'm about to turn 41 in March. My mother was only 45 when she was taken from us in 2005. It's become very real to me just how young she still was. She had so much more life to live, love to give, and self-growth to achieve. My children and siblings have lost out on the chance to grow old with my mother. I have struggled these past 16 years for closure in many ways. My mom mattered. I still feel connected to my mother even in her death. How can I not? She's my mom.
She went on to say that her mother's death has had a butterfly effect on her entire family. She said it's been hardest for her younger sister, who feels everything so deeply. She ended her testimony by asking Assistant State Attorney Jason Lewis to hold up her favorite photograph of her mom. She said she wanted the jury to see Laquita Gunther when she was at her happiest. Several jurors cried during her testimony. An administrator with the state attorney's office read a statement to the jury that was written by Laquita's mother, Barbara. In her statement, Barbara stated that her family hasn't been able to celebrate Christmas since her daughter's murder, which occurred on Christmas Eve. She also stated, "No one should have to die the way she did. This is something you never get over. It's a lifetime sentence for the family." More gut-wrenching testimony came from Julie Green's oldest sister, Rhonda, who testified that their other sister, Terry, had terminal cancer and that she died just 2 months after Julie was murdered. She was in tears as she said, yes, Julie had a high-risk lifestyle, but no matter what lifestyle she lived, she did not deserve to be hurt. Doug, their stepfather Julie was so close with, died in December 2018. Rhonda said he could never move past Julie's murder. Less than a year after his death, Julie's killer was identified and arrested. Robert Hayes' defense attorneys called their own impact witnesses, all of whom described him as a peaceful, fun-loving man who was loyal and loving to those close to him. They all said they were shocked to learn of the charges brought against him. A few of them became emotional while talking about him, understanding they were doing so to spare him from a death sentence. The defense also called their own mental health experts to the stand, including Dr. Joseph Song Chang Woo, who said based on Hayes' brain scans, he may have suffered a type of injury early in life that resulted in permanent brain damage, which affected his ability to control his anger. Prosecutor Jason Lewis cross-examined Dr. Wu. At times, he got fierce with his questioning.
Didn't you have the ability to have access to Mr. Hayes and talk to him?
That's not my customary procedure.
So you don't like to talk to the people, find out what's going on in their mind. You like to look at pieces of scans and pictures to make up your opinion, right?
That's my primary niche.
Dr. Wu admitted several times on the stand that he never met, let alone interviewed, the defendant. The jury got the case again after 3 more days of testimony, this time deciding whether to recommend a death sentence. It took them 7 hours to decide. They unanimously agreed to recommend a life sentence. In Florida, all 12 jurors must recommend death in order for a judge to have the option of sentencing a defendant to death. And so Robert Hayes was officially sentenced by the judge to life in prison. The prosecutors declined to comment after the trial was over. One of the defense attorneys, Francis Shea, did speak.
We're all here following the Constitution and justice, and this was a horrific crimes, obviously. And I think the jury was very diligent in taking their time, both on the guilty verdicts, and it took a tremendous amount of time to determine whether he should live or die. And I think from justice point of view, it's a very accurate decision.
R.J. Larissa, the state attorney for the 7th Judicial Circuit, which includes Volusia County, issued a statement after the trial. He said, while the death penalty was not imposed, Robert Hayes will no longer prey on the unsuspecting and vulnerable. He will die in our state prison system. There is justice in that. The verdict was not the end of the line for Robert Hayes. The 15th Judicial Circuit of Florida, the one that encompasses Palm Beach County, will prosecute him next for the murder of Rachel Bay. Mark Freeman, a spokesman for the state attorney's office in West Palm Beach, said his office continues to seek the death penalty in its case. No trial date has been scheduled. The January 2nd, 2008 slaying of Stacey Gage remains unsolved. Daytona Beach police declined to discuss whether Robert Hayes remains a suspect in that case. And that's all for this episode. As always, I'd love to hear what you think about this case. Let me know by joining the conversation on our Instagram at Court Junkie, by tweeting me at CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing me at podcast@courtjunkie.com. This episode was researched and written by Tony Holt, who spent 7 years working at the Daytona Beach News Journal. This case was actually solved just 2 months before he left, and so he covered it extensively. To listen to these episodes without the ads or to hear additional Court Junkie bonus episodes, Check out my Patreon options by going to courtjunkie.com/support. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.